Murder is by definition the unlawful, premeditated killing of one human being by another. There is no thriller without at least one murder. I felt inspired to write 5 short stories, each of them about a different murder. You can find all of them on my channel. If you like thrillers like I do, I recommend you a series on Netflix. Desejo Fatal, in Spanish, Fatal Seduction. I write and read all my stories by myself without using artificial intelligence. So if you like this kind of content, feel free to follow me here on YouTube by subscribing to my channel and by watching my stories. Now stay tuned because right now you can watch my murder series as a compilation. In the end, please tell me which short thriller did you like most and why. Enjoy! I'll never forget the sound of the locks turning behind us as we entered the psychiatric hospital that night. The metallic clink echoed down the dimly lit corridor, a subtle reminder that we were stepping into a place where reality blurred with madness. I thought I knew fear. I'd been a journalist for a decade, traveling to war zones, reporting from crime scenes, but nothing had prepared me for the horrors I was about to face. We were a group of 5 journalists, tasked with documenting the lives of patients in this remote psychiatric facility nestled deep in the forest. The hospital had a reputation. Whispers of strange rituals and inexplicable events followed its name like a shadow. I dismissed them as mere gossip, the sort of rumors that cling to any old institution. My focus was on the story, shedding light on the conditions these patients endured, the humanity behind the madness. If only I'd known that night would strip me of my own. The day passed uneventfully enough. We interviewed doctors and staff, filmed the crumbling walls and sterile fluorescent-lit rooms, and spoke to a few patients who were lucid enough to share fragments of their lives. By dusk, a heavy sense of unease had settled over me. The corridors seemed darker than they should be. The murmurs of the patients, some singing, some muttering, blended into an unsettling cacophony. Still, I told myself it was my imagination, fueled by the eerie atmosphere. When night fell, we were shown to a small makeshift dormitory in one wing of the hospital. The staff assured us we were safe, that the patients were securely locked in their rooms. Exhausted, I fell into an uneasy sleep. But it wasn't long before I awoke, a sudden jolt of panic snapping me into consciousness. Something was wrong. The room was too quiet, the air too still. Before I could move, hands grabbed me, strong, unyielding. A rough cloth was forced over my eyes, plunging me into darkness. I tried to scream, but a strip of tape silenced me. My heart pounded as I struggled, but whoever held me was too strong. My arms were yanked behind me, and I felt the constriction of a straitjacket tightening around my chest. My breaths came shallow and rapid as I was lifted off the bed and carried away. I couldn't see where they were taking me, but I felt the cool night air on my skin as we exited the building. The muffled crunch of leaves beneath their feet told me we were heading into the forest. The voices of my captors were low, nonsensical, a mix of murmurs and strange chants. I couldn't make out words, only the eerie cadence of their tones. Fear coiled in my stomach like a living thing, twisting and writhing with each step they took. After what felt like an eternity, we stopped. The scarf was ripped from my eyes, and the sight before me was a nightmare. We were in a clearing, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. Around me, a dozen figures in white straitjackets danced in a grotesque circle. Their movements were jerky and erratic, as if their limbs were being controlled by invisible strings. At the center of it all stood a man playing a flute, the haunting melody weaving through the night like a spell. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his face was contorted in an expression of manic glee. I wanted to scream, to cry out for help, but the tape over my mouth held my terror captive. My eyes darted around, searching for an escape, but the figures closed in tighter, their dance growing more frenzied. My captors pushed me to my knees, binding me to the ground with ropes. The earth beneath me was cold and damp, the smell of decay filling my nostrils. Then one of the dancers broke away from the circle. A woman, her long hair wild and matted, approached me. Her eyes burned with an intensity that made my skin crawl. In her hand she held a knife. My heart thundered in my chest as she raised it high, the blade glinting in the moonlight. I braced myself for the blow, but instead she turned and plunged the knife into the back of another dancer. The victim crumpled to the ground beside me, her lifeless eyes staring into mine. Blood pooled around her, seeping into the earth. I let out a muffled scream, thrashing against my restraints. The other dancers froze, their movements halting as if the strings controlling them had been cut. For a moment there was silence, broken only by the flute's haunting notes. Then chaos erupted. The dancers scattered, their white-clad forms disappearing into the forest like ghosts. The flute player dropped his instrument and fled, leaving me alone with the body and the suffocating darkness. Desperation fueled my screams, muffled though they were. I thrashed and writhed, the ropes cutting into my skin as I fought to free myself. It wasn't long before the hospital staff arrived, their flashlights cutting through the night. They found me there, bound and gagged, the dead woman's blood staining the ground beside me. Their faces were masks of horror as they untied me and removed the tape from my mouth. I gasped for air, sobbing as I tried to explain what happened. The investigation that followed unearthed a chilling truth. The patients had been planning the ritual for weeks, using scraps of paper and stolen items to communicate and organize. The staff had missed the signs, dismissing their behavior as mere delusions. But the murder? That hadn't been part of their plan. It was the act of an unhinged mind, a twist in their macabre performance that none of them had anticipated. I left the hospital the next morning, shaken to my core. The images of that night replayed in my mind like a broken film reel. The haunting melody of the flute, the lifeless eyes of the woman, the manic dance of the figures in white. They were seared into my memory, a nightmare I could never escape. I thought I'd seen the worst the world had to offer. I thought I could face anything. But as I sit here telling you this, I realize some horrors can't be explained, can't be rationalized. They linger in the shadows, waiting for the moment when you least expect them. And when they find you, they leave a mark that never fades. I still hear the scream in my nightmares. It wasn't just a sound. It was the kind of scream that clawed its way into your bones, a shriek of terror that didn't fade but instead burrowed deep, embedding itself in the marrow of my memory. It belonged to my best friend Emma. And it came from inside that house. We were just kids, playing hide and seek in the woods behind my grandparents' house, the kind of dense shadow-drenched forest that seemed to stretch forever. Emma was visiting for the summer, staying with her grandparents just like me. And then there was Daniel, the third in our little trio, the only boy and always the one daring us to do something reckless. That day the dare led us to the house. Everyone in the village knew about the old Murdoch house. No one lived there. No one went near it. The stories about it twisted and changed depending on who you asked. Some said it belonged to a witch who vanished into the night. Others swore a family had been murdered there, their bodies never found. But the version that stuck with us was that the house was haunted, inhabited by something nameless, something waiting. So when Daniel suggested a bet, whoever was brave enough to go inside would get dessert from the other two for the rest of the summer, Emma didn't hesitate. She always had something to prove, especially to Daniel. "You two are such cowards," she said with a grin before pushing open the door and stepping inside. We waited. The wind stirred the trees. A bird shrieked somewhere in the distance, but otherwise the world was silent. I shifted from foot to foot, glancing at Daniel, who stood frozen beside me, his jaw clenched. Then the gunshot. A crack of thunder split the air, too close, too real. And then Emma screamed. And then nothing. Daniel grabbed my arm. "We have to go." "But Emma." "Now, Lily." We ran like the devil was chasing us, lungs burning, legs aching, branches slashing at our skin. We burst through my grandparents' front door, gasping, sobbing. The words tumbled out in a frantic, jumbled mess. My grandfather called the police. My grandmother held me tight, whispering prayers. When the officers arrived at the house, they found a body. A woman covered in blood, shot in the chest. Emma was there too, bound hand and foot, her mouth gagged. She had fainted. She woke up in the hospital with no memory of what had happened. But I did. I hadn't seen anything, but I had heard something. A shuffle, a ragged breath, the sound of footsteps leaving before we had arrived. Someone had been in that house with Emma. Someone who had left her alive. Why? Years passed. The case went cold. The police had their stories, but with no witnesses, no one who remembered anything, they let it go. A name had been whispered in the village, the murdered woman's father-in-law, but nothing stuck. Emma and her family moved away, and the abandoned house rotted, collapsing into itself like something relieved to be forgotten. Until now. I hadn't seen Emma in years, but when she returned to the village to visit her grandparents, Daniel and I met up with her, just like old times. It felt strange walking through the woods again, like we were ghosts retracing our own steps. And then we saw the ruins. Where the house had once stood, there were only remnants of stone and wood, half swallowed by moss and decay. The air felt thick, pressing against my skin like something unseen was watching. Emma took a step forward, her face unreadable, her fingers twitching at her sides. And then, just like that, she stopped. Her whole body stiffened, her breath hitched, her eyes widened, and in that moment I knew. She remembered. She turned to me, her face drained of color. "I saw him," she whispered. "I saw his face." The next day she went to the police. The case was reopened. The woman's father-in-law, a man now old and frail, had been a suspect long ago, but no one could place him at the scene. Now, with Emma's testimony, they could. He had killed his daughter-in-law that night, believing she was trying to take his son away from him. Emma had seen it all, had locked eyes with him before he gagged her and left her for dead. Her mind had buried the memory, protecting her from something too horrible to comprehend at 10 years old. But the forest never forgets. Neither do the dead, and neither do I. That night, I dreamt of the house again, but this time something was different. I wasn't standing outside waiting. I was inside, and I wasn't alone. A whisper curled through the darkness, slithering against my ear like a breath not my own. "Lily," it sighed, "you left me." I turned, my heart hammering, and there she was. Emma, but not Emma. Her face was pale, her lips dark, her eyes nothing but black pits dripping with something thick, something red. Her hands were reaching for me. I woke up screaming. The next morning, Emma was gone. Not just gone, missing. Her grandparents had no idea where she had gone. Her car was still in the driveway. Her phone, her purse, untouched. It was as if she had simply vanished. But I knew better. Because when I turned on my phone, there was a single message waiting for me. A photo of the ruins. And in the center of the collapsed house, something new. Footprints in the dirt, leading into the darkness, and beneath it a single word. Come.
Do you like horror stories?
The nightmares never stop. Even now, 10 years later, I wake up drenched in sweat, my breath caught in my throat, as if unseen hands are still wrapped around it. Sometimes I hear the gunshot again, echoing in the silence of my apartment. Other times I hear the whisper, the one I will never forget. "I'm coming for you!" It all started when I was 20. Just a young journalist, desperate to make a name for myself. That desperation led me to Victor Lazaro, a wealthy businessman with shadows lurking behind his smile. They whispered about his ties to the mafia, about a woman who had been murdered. By accident, they claimed. A mistake. But there are no mistakes in the world Lazaro moved in. Only orders followed and consequences faced. The woman, Isabella Ricci, had been a former escort rumored to have known too much. She had been found in an abandoned warehouse, a single gunshot wound to the head, her body positioned as if someone had tried to make it look like a suicide. But there were no signs she had ever held the gun. Her death was ruled suspicious, but no charges were filed. The whispers claimed she was killed because she had overheard something she shouldn't have. And that something, I believed, led straight to Victor Lazaro. I was determined to uncover the truth. Lazaro's mansion loomed before me that evening, a testament to excess. Gilded chandeliers dripped from the high ceilings, casting eerie golden reflections across the marble floors. Dark mahogany furniture and thick Persian carpets absorbed sound, making my footsteps feel insignificant as I was led inside. Lazaro greeted me in a crisp charcoal suit, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Lazaro," I said, placing my recorder on the glass coffee table. My hands were steady, but my heart wasn't. "Thank you for agreeing to this." He exhaled a trail of smoke, watching me.
"I enjoy a good story,"
he said.
"even the ones that aren't true."
For an hour we spoke. He denied everything with the ease of a man accustomed to slipping through the cracks of the law. His business dealings, legitimate. His rumored mafia ties, absurd. The dead woman,
"Never met her,"
he claimed, his face impassive. But I saw it in his fingers, how they twitched, in his eyes, how they flickered toward the hallway more times than I could count. He was hiding something. And then it happened. I excused myself to the restroom, still replaying his words in my mind. The bathroom was pristine, its sink gold-plated. As I washed my hands, I heard it, the creak of a door, the low murmur of voices. I froze. A man's voice, sharp and furious.
"You killed her for nothing."
Then the gunshot. My breath hitched in my throat. I pressed my back against the door, my pulse hammering in my ears. Footsteps, hurried, heavy, purposeful, passed by. Then silence. I don't know how long I stayed there, trapped in fear, waiting for something, anything. 5 minutes, 10, an eternity. Finally, I cracked the door open. The house was eerily still. The luxurious living room looked exactly as I had left it, except for one thing. Victor Lazaro was gone. My hands shook as I dialed the police. They arrived in minutes, officers swarming the mansion, searching every room. No sign of Lazaro. His car was still outside. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no body. It was as if he had been erased from existence. The next day, his parents reported him missing. Investigators combed through security footage, cross-checked my statement, and even analyzed my tape recorder. Nothing. No evidence of violence, no record of him leaving. Victor Lazaro had simply vanished. I returned to the newsroom that night, exhausted and shaken. My editor pounced the moment I walked in.
"Hey, did you get anything?"
I handed him the recorder. "Just the interview," I muttered. He played it back while I sat there, staring at nothing. My voice, his voice, the conversation, then silence. And then, just before the tape cut off, a whisper, a woman's voice. "I'm coming for you!" My blood turned to ice. My editor frowned.
"Who the hell is that?"
"I don't know. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after that." 10 years later, the fear never left. Nothing has happened. No strange phone calls, no mysterious shadows lurking outside my window. But I still look over my shoulder. Every night I check my logs twice. Sometimes I wake up gasping, convinced I heard the whisper again. Maybe it was just paranoia. Maybe it was a trick of sound. Maybe, just maybe, Victor Lazaro's sins didn't die with him. And maybe one day the whisper will come again. And this time she won't be just a voice. "I'm coming for you!" I never told anyone what I saw that summer. Not really, not in full. But sometimes late at night, when I close my eyes, I can still smell the damp earth of the forest floor, hear the distant rumble of approaching thunder, and see the dull, glassy eyes of a dead boy staring at nothing. It was 1994 and I was 11 years old. My parents had sent me to spend the summer with my grandparents in their tiny village, nestled between thick forests and winding dirt roads. I didn't mind. The air was fresh, the days stretched endlessly, and I had my friends, other children whose laughter echoed through the trees as we ran barefoot over sun-warmed grass. One afternoon, as the sun hung heavy and golden in the sky, we played hide-and-seek near the edge of the woods. The air hummed with cicadas, and the world smelled of pine and wildflowers. I had just counted to 50 and was about to go looking when I felt something. A presence. Turning my head, I saw it. A doe stood not 10 feet away, staring at me with impossibly deep, dark eyes. There was something strange about her, something unnatural in the way she stood so still, so unafraid. Then, as if beckoning me, she turned and walked into the trees. I don't know why I followed her. Curiosity, maybe. Or something deeper, some ancient whisper in my bones. The game forgotten, I stepped off the path and into the waiting shadows of the woods. The doe moved slowly, pausing now and then to look back at me, ensuring I was still behind her. The deeper we went, the darker it became. The laughter of my friends faded. The trees grew taller, denser, swallowing me whole. Then I realized I was lost. Panic licked at my chest. I turned in a slow circle, my breath quickening. The trees all looked the same. The path had vanished. I was alone. And then the rain began. It started as a whisper, a drizzle that pattered against the leaves. But soon it became a roar, drenching me in seconds, making my clothes cling to my skin. My breath came in ragged gasps as I stumbled forward, desperate to find my way back. That's when I saw it. A cave. Its gaping mouth loomed ahead, black as the void, a refuge from the rain. I stepped inside, my shoes slipping on the wet stone, my hands brushing against the cold, damp walls. The air smelled of moss, of earth, and of something else. Something metallic. Then I saw the blood. It pooled on the ground in dark, glistening puddles, smeared across the cave floor like frantic brushstrokes. My stomach lurched, my mind screaming at me to run, to turn back, to forget. But then I saw him. A boy laid crumpled just beyond the bloodstains, his small body limp, his face pale beneath the bruises that marred his skin. His eyes, open and unseeing, stared at the ceiling. His mouth was slightly parted, as if he had tried to speak one last word before death took him. I knew him, Tom, the quiet boy from the end of the village, the one who never played with us, who always watched from the distance with sad eyes. Tom who barely spoke, who always flinched when someone raised their voice. I opened my mouth to scream, and then my foot slipped. Pain exploded in my skull as I crashed onto the rocks. The world tilted, spun, darkened. The last thing I saw before the blackness took me was the lifeless body of Tom, the rain outside turning to a torrential downpour. I woke to the sound of voices, to the blinding glare of flashlights. A man in uniform was crouched over me, shaking me gently. "Laura," he said, his voice urgent, "can you hear me?" I blinked up at him, my mind sluggish, my thoughts a tangled mess. Then it came back all at once, the blood, the body, the cave. "Tom," I gasped, sitting up too fast, my head throbbing. "He's here, he's..." But when I looked, the cave was empty. No blood, no body, nothing but damp rock and silence. I must have dreamt it, I told myself. A nightmare conjured by fear and injury. That was the only explanation. The police, my grandparents, the villagers, they had all searched. They had found nothing. But that night I dreamed again. In my dream, Tom stood before me, his bruises gone, his face soft with something that might have been relief. "He killed me," he whispered. "My stepfather. He didn't want me anymore." I woke up gasping, my skin cold with sweat. The next day I asked about Tom, about where he had gone, but the villagers only exchanged uneasy glances. His family had left, they said, moved away the day before. No one knew where. But I knew. I went to the police and told them what I had seen, what I had dreamed. At first they didn't believe me, but then they started to dig. They found him, buried deep in the woods, in a shallow grave, just like in my dream. His stepfather was arrested soon after, a man with cruel eyes and whiskey on his breath. A man who had bet away his last coins and decided that a hungry child was one burden too many. Tom had tried to run. He hadn't made it. I should have felt relief, knowing that justice had been done. But that night I dreamed one last time. In my dream there was no cave, no blood, no horror. Only sunlight and laughter. A meadow filled with wildflowers. A river clear and cool. And children, so many children, running, playing, free. Among them was Tom. He turned to me smiling, and for the first time his eyes weren't sad. Then he ran, disappearing into the golden light. And I woke, tears on my cheeks, the weight of summer finally lifting from my bones. I never saw Tom again. But sometimes when the wind whispers through the trees, when the forest stands still in the hush of twilight, I feel a presence watching. Not something menacing, something grateful. And somewhere in the depths of the woods, I know a doe is still waiting. I always considered myself a creature of routine. Wake up, work, gym, sleep, repeat. There was something comforting in the monotony, the predictability. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that horror slathers into the gaps of routine, curling around the edges of what we think is safe until it strikes. It was a Tuesday, an ordinary, forgettable day. My alarm buzzed at 6, and by 7:30 I was in the pool. The water was cold at first, but the repetitive strokes soon warmed me. I liked this time, early, quiet, my own little sanctuary before the grind of corporate life consumed me. I had been swimming for about 15 minutes when they arrived. A man and a woman. He was tall and lean, his muscles taut like a coiled spring rather than the smooth bulk of a swimmer. A thin black mustache curled slightly at the ends, giving him a vintage, almost sinister look. The woman was strikingly beautiful, delicate, bird-like. Her blonde hair was tied in a sleek ponytail, her collarbones sharp, her limbs almost too slender. She had the kind of face you'd expect to see on a billboard, airbrushed and perfect. They spoke Russian, or rather he spoke. She nodded, eyes darting. Even from a distance I could tell something was wrong. She was afraid. I tried to ignore them at first. I swam another lap, but the unease sat in my chest like a swallowed stone. When I reached the pool's edge, I stopped to watch. We moved through the water side by side, synchronized yet separate. She kept glancing at him, her strokes hesitant, as if waiting for permission to breathe. A shiver ran down my spine. I climbed out, suddenly desperate to leave, though I couldn't explain why. The cold air bit at my skin as I grabbed my towel and hurried toward the locker room. The woman from the front desk smiled at me as I passed, and I considered saying something. But what would I even say? That I had a bad feeling, that a couple swimming together seemed wrong? By the time I reached my office, the feeling hadn't left me. It was absurd, really. I didn't know them. Maybe they were having an argument. Maybe I was overthinking things. 2 hours later, the police knocked on my door. The woman was dead, murdered, strangled in the shower and left crumpled on the tile like a discarded doll. My stomach twisted. I was one of the only people who had seen them together. The front desk woman and I gave our statements, describing the man in as much detail as possible. The mustache, the sharp eyes, the controlled way he moved. The police took notes, nodded gravely, and then they left. That night my phone buzzed. "You're next." My breath caught. My first instinct was denial. A prank. A wrong number. But no, this wasn't random. He knew who I was. He knew I had seen him. I grabbed a duffel bag, threw in some essentials, and called my best friend. I didn't tell her everything, just that I was too anxious to be alone. She told me to come over. As I walked to my car, the feeling of being watched was suffocating. Every shadow stretched too long. Every parked car seemed to harbor unseen eyes. My skin prickled with the certainty that I was not alone. But I made it to my friend's house, and nothing happened. Days passed, then weeks, then months. The police never found him. The case went cold. I told myself I was safe, that he had fled the country, that his words, "you're next," had been an empty threat. And maybe they were. Because nothing happened, until it did. Years later, I was on vacation in Crete. Greece had always been a dream of mine. The whitewashed buildings, the scent of salt and sun, the rhythmic crash of the waves. It was a new chapter, far removed from the past. I was free. Or so I thought. It was a warm summer night when I walked into a bar with a friend, laughter bubbling in my throat, the weight of my old fears long forgotten. And then I saw him, sitting at the bar, a glass of something dark in his hand. His mustache was gone, but the eyes remained the same, cold, unforgiving, calculating. My breath hitched. The world tilted. He looked up at me. Recognition flickered across his face. A slow smile curled his lips. I turned on my heel and grabbed my friend's wrist, pulling her toward the exit. My heartbeat thundered in my ears, drowning out everything else. I didn't have to look back to know he was watching me. I could feel it. Outside, the warm night air did nothing to soothe the ice in my veins. My friend was asking what was wrong, but I couldn't answer. All I could think was, "You're next." The words had never stopped haunting me, and now they were real again.